Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us again. We are now in week 45. Hard to believe that the year is almost over. And we are going to be creating a custom navigation experience in Power BI. This week's challenge is really all about creating something that is really user friendly. So, Power BI does not have to look like it looks out of the box. We can navigate using things other than just the inbuilt tabs that exist in the um, Power BI file itself. So, you can see here that we're using some custom icons to create a navigation pane on the left hand side here, and then within our report, we've built in some little goodies like some report page tooltips. So let's jump into Power BI and get started. The first thing that we need to do for this challenge is to get some data. We're going to get data from the web, and I went ahead and copied the URL to my clipboard, so I'm just going to paste this in here. You can find this in the challenge post itself, and you'll notice here that this is actually a PDF if you look at the extension there. We're going to go ahead and load this data. And what you'll see is the PDF itself here has 13 pages. And within the 13 pages, there are some charts and graphs. There's quite a bit of text. And then there are what can be interpreted as tables. So let's see what Power BI thinks is going on here. Power BI thinks that there are tables embedded in the text and that there are pages themselves. And you can notice it does match up with what's in the document, so that's a good start. I know for this challenge that we want to get data from table 8, which is pages 8 through 12, and that's the listings of all of the rankings. So this is exactly what we want. Now, if you wanted to see, okay, what's contained on these different pages, you can certainly preview them. It's not a problem, but I already know that I want table 8, so I have it selected. I'm going to go ahead and transform data. Remember, we really never want to click load. We always want to transform data. From here, we are going to create a data model in Power BI. We want to look at the well-being elements and their descriptions. We want to look at the well-being data by element, and then we also want to look at the overall well-being score and the ranking by community. So the first thing I'm going to do is I just clicked refresh on this data, even though I know it has not changed. But I'm going to go ahead and rename this, and I'm just going to call this um, raw data. I like to sort of stage my queries here so that I have a table that is completely untouched. I'm then going to reference this query so that any changes I were to make to the original would be pulled into this as well. And I'm going to label this well-being data. So this is just going to be the overall well-being data. I actually am not going to worry about the ranks for any of the individual elements because we're going to make those into their own table. But before we do that, we've got a little bit of cleanup we need to do here. So the first thing that you may notice is that we have some null values in here, and we do not want those. So I'm going to go ahead, well, actually, let me back up. First thing you always want to do is to get rid of columns that you don't need. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to remove those columns. Then I'm going to go ahead and remove the null values. The order in which you do the steps is important. So here we've got our overall well-being data. We've got our rank. We've got the community. So I'm just going to go ahead and name this community. We've got our well-being index score, and then I'm going to do a couple of things. The first thing I'm going to do is I know if I try to map these communities in Power BI, they're not going to map properly. So I want to just break out the states. So I'm going to add a column. I want to keep the community name intact, but I also want to have a state column. So I'm going to add a state column, and I'm going to just do some splitting this by delimiter or so we're going to use extract here. I'm going to go ahead and extract the last characters. I am going to extract the last two characters from each row. And you can see here that it pulls out the state. Now I'm going to go ahead, in order to avoid inserting an additional step, I'm just going to go into the formula bar here and I'm going to rename this column state. Okay, the next thing that I want to do so that I'm able to use the quintile in my data is I actually just want to take a look at, or I want to categorize these rather into different quintiles. And we know from the data itself that you can see here that 1 through 38 is the highest quintile. Second quintile is 39 to 75. Third quintile, 76 to 112, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and use this breakdown to just create a conditional column. So I'll go ahead and add a conditional column. And here I'm going to call this quintile. And I'm going to say if the rank is less than 39, and my brain is not working properly. If the rank is less than 39, then it's going to be quintile 1, else if the rank is less than. And it does these in order. And that's quintile 2. I'll just keep going here. Okay, couple things. So you can see here that if you had I wanted to create a custom column where I wrote out an if statement, you could have done that, but you also can just do it by using the UI by adding a conditional column. So Power Query does that for us. If you want to check your work, you can scroll through and see that everything has been assigned accordingly. So we've got our quintiles, we've got our states. So our well-being data is in shape. The next thing I want to do is to create my data by element. So I'm going to go ahead and reference my raw data query again. Now I'm going to call this data by element. I'm going to do that same cleanup, and perhaps I should have done this in the raw data, but I'm going to get these null values out. Now, we know that for all intents and purposes, our rank here actually acts as an index. So we don't need to match on the community name. Matching on it's a better idea to match on a numeric value than text. So we don't need the community name, we don't need the overall well-being index score, and we don't need this column number 9 out here. So go ahead and select all three of those. Then you can right-click and remove columns. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to unpivot these other columns so that we have our element here, and we have our value. The next thing I'm going to do is I am just going to replace the word rank with nothing. And I did space rank. I'm not going to replace that with nothing. Okay, and now we are nearly there. The last thing we need to do is we need to get the description here out of the raw data. So the purpose, social, financial, and when I say description, sorry, I mean the element description. But I'm actually we need to do something a little bit different for this one. So I'm going to duplicate this query, and I'm actually going to remove a couple of the steps and go back to the navigation so I can see what's happening here. So the source, you can see, this is what you see in that preview window when you're looking at what Power Query is pulling in. And if I remember correctly, the descriptions were available on one of these pages here. In order to, in order to preview them, you can click in the cell, not on the word table, but in the cell itself, and you'll get a preview down at the bottom here of what it is that you're looking at. Okay, so I can see here in page 2, if you scroll down, we do get the elements of well-being in column 3 here. So I am just going to go ahead and use this one. I am going to click on table, which will add the navigation step. I then know I only need to keep column 3, so we want to remove those other columns first. I'm going to remove the null values. And now I have my 5, elements of well-being. I'm going to, again, add a column, and I am going to extract text before a delimiter, and I'm going to get everything before the semicolon. And now you can see I have my element description, and I've got my element. I'm going to rename this query elements. And then I've got all the data I need. So I'm going to go ahead and close and apply. I am now going to take a look and make sure that our tables are connected in the way that they need to be. And I made a big mistake. Well, not a big mistake, but I made a mistake. We want to make sure that our raw data, our staging table, is not ever loaded to the model. So I'm going to jump back into Power Query. I'm going to right click and I'm going to disable the load on that because we don't need to be able to see that in our in the front end of Power BI. So once you've disabled the load, you'll see here that your staged table or whatever you disabled is in italics. There we go. And then I'm going to come back and shape this up a little bit. Okay, so in this case, the well-being data is essentially like, for the purposes of this, it's like summarized data that's giving us, it's really the connection between the community itself, which the rank is acting as an index in this case. And then we also have the element description. And so the connection of the relationship here is the element and the element description. So we know that this data can all interact with itself, with the rest of the data that's here. Before we can build our visualization, we do need to add a couple of measures. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here while I'm in the data view, just because I know exactly what it is that I want. So we need 3 measures. We need one for the top 10 overall communities. That's going to show us, what the top 10 are. You could also do that by using a filter on a visual, but it is really best to create what are called explicit measures for things that you could potentially want to see in more than one place. So let me just give you an example. If you wanted to look at the top 10 communities overall, you could put in the rank and the community into a table. And let's just, while this is working, let's just bump up this text size because it's tiny so that you can see it. All right, so you could theoretically do a filter on this visual where the value is less than, let's just say less than 11. That'll give you your top 10 communities. And you could use this in a visual, right? But if you needed to use this in more than one place, you're not going to be able to do that. So the best way is to go ahead and create a measure. So for this report, we're going to create the top 10 overall measure, and we'll just right click and create a new measure. And I'm going to call this top 10 overall. Let's make this a little bigger so you can see it. And this is going to be, we're actually just going to use a calculate function here. Now, there are quite a few different ways that you could do this, but I am being lazy and doing it the most simple way. So I'm going to get the rank from my well-being data. It's already ranked, so it's not like we have to actually do any math here. So I'm going to get my rank, and then I am going to just say, give me the rank where the rank is less than or equal to 10. Now, I haven't actually done any sort of evaluation on how well does this perform compared to if you were to do it a different way. There are both top N and rank X formulas that you could use. Top N won't work here because that returns a table. So you could use rank X, but we're not going to worry about that right now. We're really keeping it simple. I'm just going to use a calculate. So if I wanted to take a look at the top 10 communities, so I need to get community in here. Let's turn this into a table. Should be the exact same thing, right? And now let's see if I were to put my measure on this table here, top 10, the rank from, what comes straight out of the data set matches exactly to my top 10 over here. Now there are a couple things we need to do. The first is let's format this sucker so that it has no decimal points. And let's make sure it is a number. Come on now. There we go. We can just format it as a whole number. Okay, so that is my first measure that we have. Our next two measures that we need to create are the top and bottom 5 communities for each element of well-being. So if you remember correctly, we took the the data by element, and we said, okay, for purpose, these are the rankings. So I want to know what are the top 5 elements for purpose, or sorry, what are the top 5 communities for purpose, and what are the bottom 5 communities for purpose? Because if you remember, we're looking at our report here, and we're looking at the top 5 for each of the different elements. Okay, so we're going to pull out the top 5 and the bottom 5. So stay with me here. We're going to do some more lazy DAX, and we're actually just going to use a calculate again. So I am going to go ahead and create a new measure. Now notice these measures are being placed into the tables I'm working in. If you're doing anything real for work, you're probably going to want to have either a measures table or use folders in your tables themselves. But for the purposes here, we'll just go ahead and type these out, be a little sloppy. But again, we're going to use a calculate. So we're using an average because you have to inside of a calculate, but we're going to do the exact same thing. So we're doing the data by element, the rank, and then we're getting it for, I'm missing a paren here. We're getting it for where the data by element rank is less than 6. And I did not format that properly, which bothers me. Okay, there we go. So there's our top 5. And then for the bottom 5, we're going to do the exact same thing. Now, I normally do have to plot my measures in a table to make sure that they make sense. I have already built this out, so I know that these function properly. And here, we're going to say where the rank is greater than 181. And I am noticing I am on cold medicine, so forgive me, but I messed up the greater than and less than sign in that last one. So let's go back and fix that. Oh no, I did it properly. Okay, good. All right, so we've got our top 5 and our bottom 5 by element. All right, so our data is now in shape. We can now start putting some visuals on the page. But before we start building, let's do a couple of things. So the first thing that I always do before building any report is I make sure to set my theme. I'm going to just go ahead and use the high contrast theme here. And within that, I'm actually going to customize the current theme and I'm going to bump up some of the sizes. So I'll get a pop-up window here and I just bump up it says that I cannot use that with this custom theme. So I'm going to click update and then I bump up the font sizes of everything. So the minimum readable font size is 12. I bump everything up beyond that just to make sure that things are readable when you build. So I always start with my theme. Then the next thing that we need to do is we need to create some icons. So I would sketch out what you want your viz to look like. You can just use pen and paper or whatever it is that you want. And then I'm actually going to create some icons here in PowerPoint. So I already had this PowerPoint slide open. I am going to insert icons. And if you remember what the 5 dimensions of well-being are, we want an icon for each of those. We also want a home icon, and then we need an icon that we're going to use for the overview. So for my home icon, there are a bunch of different ones. I'll just use the simple home here. I'm also going to do and you do have to get a little bit creative, but I like to use the inbuilt icons just because they make life really, really easy. You don't have to worry about copyright or paying for things. So go ahead and set these up the way that you want to. You do need to make them big enough so that when they save, they'll render with high enough quality to be used in another report. Go ahead and make these the color that you want, and then to save them, you need to right click on them and save them as a picture. And then once you save these things as a picture, they'll be ready to import into Power BI. And they need to be a PNG, they cannot be an SVG, just FYI. Okay, so now we're going to jump back into Power BI and we're going to start building. So when you build out the custom navigation, there are a bunch of different ways that you can do it. We are going to build using bookmarks and buttons, and we are going to create, the first thing we're going to do is to create a landing page. And on our landing page is where we're going to set up the menu for the first time. So I'm going to insert a shape here, and I'm just going to insert a plain old rectangle. As you guys saw, my theme is fairly boring. And I'm going to just go ahead. This is the tab that everyone's going to see. So I'm going to name this Wellbeing Index. You can name it whatever you want. And it is on this green bar here that I am going to add add my icons, which are white. So I'm going to add my icons to here so that people can see them. Now, it is important that when you're adding visual elements here, like icons or things that are not data, I always check to make sure that this visual header is off. In the theme that I selected, I believe that the default for the visual header is off, and in fact, that may be the default in general at this point, but you just want to make sure that happens. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an image. I am going to start with my home icon. Going to insert the image. I have to place it over my green bar so that I can see what's going on here. And I'm going to place it exactly where I want it. Hot tip, if you turn on the grid lines on the View tab of the ribbon, that may help you line things up a little bit. You can also snap things to the grid. I don't like to do that, but you can. So you can just dink around with this a little bit, get it exactly where you want it. And then what I like to do to make sure that things are properly lined up for my next image is I like to go over here to the general tab of the formatting pane and just look at, my X and Y and make sure that everything is, make sure that I know where everything is so that you can line up your other ones and you can make them the exact same size. So I'm going to continue placing these and I'm going to speed this up. We're going to get them all placed and then I'll show you how to turn them into buttons. Okay, so let's say I had taken the time to dink around with these, get them all the exact size I want. The next thing that I always do is I like to use the inbuilt tools to line things up. So I like to go to the format, align. I like to distribute them vertically and then to align center. So everything should be nice and lined up. What we're then going to do is this is our navigation bar. We're going to use this on every single page and we're going to make it appear as though people are not navigating through different pages. So what you're going to want to do is, build out your overview page with the information you want on it, or your home page rather. Then you're going to build your overview page. And in this report, I built a different page for each different element of well-being. You're going to go ahead and hide these pages. And you're going to take your icons or your navigation bar really, and you're going to put it on every single page. Before you do that, go ahead and turn on the selection pane and let's group these things together. So we want to do two things. We want to make sure that they're properly grouped, and we also want to set the tab order while we're here so that people go through if they're using a screen reader or if they are, tabbing using keyboard controls, that they go through things in the right order. So the first thing I'm going to do is just label these, and this is a little tedious, so I'm not going to show you one by one, but okay, so the layer order here, this just tells you front to back what the layer is going to be. So I want my menu bar in the back, and then these are a bit arbitrary, but I like to line them up in the order that they appear. Then the next most important thing is that we order the tabs. So since I already have these labeled, you'll see that they appear in order here. So we're going to start with home, and then we're going to go to overview. Next is community. I did these in alphabetic order once we started getting into the elements. Financial, physical, purpose, social, and then the menu bar I'm going to hide. So I'm just hiding that from the tab order. It doesn't hide it anywhere else. Okay, and last but not least, I'm going to take this whole entire nav bar. I'm going to highlight it all. I'm going to right click and I'm going to group it. I'm going to name this the menu bar just so I can keep track of things. I'm then going to take the menu bar and I'm going to copy and paste it onto each of the pages. Did that work? Let's see here. Menu bar, copy, paste. Now I can have my menu bar on each page. Last but not least, with the navigation here, you want to set each of the images to act as a button. And in order to do that, you have to turn the action on. So I'm going to make this page navigation. The destination is going to be the overview tab. I am going to create a tooltip that just lists where it's going to navigate to. So you can see that as I hover over the button, it will say, or the icon rather, it'll say overview. When I control and click, it will navigate to the overview page. So in place of using traditional bookmarks and buttons, we're actually using images and actions to take us through the page navigation. One additional thing that I did on every page is that I went from um, with the action here, when you are landed on a page itself, I went ahead and manually turned the background on. And I set it according to the theme color. So I used this darker color here. And now you can see that I was not careful when I actually set these up. So let me make this line up properly so that it looks right. But now what you can see is as you navigate through the different pages, so this is the home page. Then when we come to the overview page, I'm going to do the exact same formatting on my button here. So just turn, or sorry, on my icon here. So same thing. Okay, so that way, as people go from one page to the next, they look like they are seamlessly navigating through each of the tabs. So that's really it. And it is by setting up each of those bookmarks, or rather icons with navigation, that you can move through each of the different tabs. Last but not least, there's one additional little sneaky thing that I did in this report, and that is I actually used a table icon, or sorry, a table visual here. So it's just a regular out of the box table, but I did not like what the header was doing. So I put a shape over top of it. Now, again, to understand where things are and how things are layered, I have my shape above my table. So I would say when you're customizing things, you really have to take advantage of using the selection pane, because here in my final product, I've got a shape as a background. Okay, then I also have a shape with my title in it. I have another shape, that's the bottom one. And then this top and bottom label, these are for the tables themselves. So you really have to take advantage of using the selection pane, layering things properly, and then of course setting the tab order properly so that people who are using keyboard navigation can get through things. But that's this week's video. So you can create your custom navigation any way that you want. In this way, we are using icons and actions to navigate through the different hidden pages. And that is it. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next week.